Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart be lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, my constant friend is He. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know He watches me.
Hello, welcome to our Bible study. My name is Clint McElroy. Today we'll be in 1 Kings chapter 10. We will be meeting this morning at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. We'll also be meeting at 9 a.m. for classes, so please join us for those as well. If you'd care to, you're welcome to join us in the auditorium to watch this class on the large screen there. We want to make sure everyone knows we have these English Standard Version Bibles available from the World Bible School. If you'd care to have one, please contact our church office and we'll make arrangements to get you one. Our sick list is long and we have many people that need to be considered for prayers and attention in other ways. We have these people listed on our bulletin that's in the foyer, so please grab one of those before you leave the auditorium today. As is our custom, we want to remember the story of the two men on the road to Emmaus who were joined by a third man on the way. When they got to their destination, that man revealed himself to be Jesus, the Christ, resurrected from the dead, and quickly he left their company. As the men gave consideration to the time they had spent with Jesus on the way, they remembered that there had been a burning in their heart. That burning that they had in their heart is what we hope to kindle in our own hearts as we draw closer to the Lord through a study of His Word. We also want to remember the admonitions of Leviticus chapter 19, to be holy, for the Lord our God is holy. And we want to remember the story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam and Jeroboam's story is coming up in short order in our materials, so we'll forego reviewing their stories at this time. But I do want to call your attention to the story of the prophet that came to Jeroboam. This prophet came at the direction of the Lord to tell Jeroboam that he was doing something wrong. And once he'd done that and availed himself of his obligations in that regard, he headed home following the last instruction that the Lord had given him to go home. And on the way he was met by another prophet who told him that the Lord had instructed him that he should come and have a meal with him. He did this for his own purposes so that he would have honor of having the presence of this prophet in his company. It sounded good to the first prophet, so he went and had that meal, and as he sat down, the Lord revealed to him that he would die because he had disobeyed the instruction of the Lord. And indeed, as he got up to leave, he was met on the way by a lion and killed. The story has a more telling point, and that is our disposition to follow a lie, to believe a lie presented to us by someone for whatever reason, and that lie ends up resulting in us being disobedient toward the Lord and facing spiritual death as a result. It's a terrible thing to ponder on, to think about, that perhaps something we've learned from someone we trusted was not true and not acceptable to the Lord, but we're not without a way of finding out. The Lord gave us His Word, and we can go to His Word and look at those things that are found there and compare what we've heard from anybody to what we find there. If we find that what we have heard is in accord with what we find in the Word of the Lord, it's okay, it's good, it's fine. But if we find that it is not, that it is something different than what we find in the Lord's Word, then we should leave that behind and follow the Lord's Word. And so, if you hear something in my presentation to you that you've checked out against the Word and you find that what I've said is not consistent with the Word, I encourage you to leave what I've said behind and follow the Word of the Lord. And if you do so, I hope that you will let me know what that is, because I am not coming to you to tell you a lie. And if I told you something that you find to be untrue, it may be at my own peril as well. So please let me know if you find something that I've said is not consistent with what you find in the Word. I hope you'll join me today as we enter into this study. This is the last full study we'll see of a Solomon that was acceptable in the eyes of the Lord. The materials in chapter 10 of 1 Kings correlate almost word for word with the materials of 2 Chronicles chapter 9. There is a shorter account in 2 Chronicles, and it doesn't include as much detail as we find in 1 Kings. So we will forego any readings from that area. But it is worth a review of that material to see the differences between the two accounts. So join me now as we enter into this study of 1 Kings chapter 10. 1 Kings chapter 10 from the English Standard Version. Now when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices, and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. Verse 3. And Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers, and his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more breath in her. Verse 6. And she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpassed the report that I heard. Happy are your men, happy are your servants, who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. He has made you king, that you may execute justice and righteousness. Verse 10. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold and a very great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again came such an abundance of spices as these that the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Verse 11. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a very great amount of almug wood and precious stones. And the king made of the almug wood supports for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, also lyres and harps for the singers. No such almug wood has come or been seen to this day. Verse 13. And King Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatever she asked besides what was given to her by the bounty of King Solomon. So she turned and went back to her own land with her servants. Verse 14. Now the weight of the gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides that which came from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. Verse 16. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield, and he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Verse 18. The king also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the throne had a round top, and on each side of the seat were armrests, and 2 lions standing beside the armrests. Verse 20. While 12 lions stood there, one on each end of a step on the 6 steps. The like of it was never made in any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. Verse 22. For the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Verse 23. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. Verse 26. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. Verse 28. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kue, and the king's traders received them from Kue at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. And so through the king's traders they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. Okay, so last time I believe we studied out of chapter 9 as the Lord approved of Solomon for what he had done in the construction of the temple and the dedication of the temple. And the first part of chapter 9, as soon as Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he had appeared to him at Gibeon, which to me means as in a dream, as he had at Gibeon in the first part of the study there. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your plea which you have made before me. I have consecrated this house that you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. And as for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my rules, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, saying, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. But if you turn aside from following me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples, and this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? And they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on other gods, and worshipped them and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all this disaster on them. I'm telling you, that's a great commendation and a great curse. And it's going to play out here in short order. I don't know, the rest of the chapter here is other things that Solomon did in regards to Hiram and in regards to collecting great wealth and the way that he had handled the labor force that did all these works for him. And he did great wonders and great works there. But going on from there into chapter 12, going on from there into chapter 10, we see that there's a confirmation here. And I look at chapter 10 as kind of a confirmation and an explanation that the descriptions that we've seen are insufficient to describe the greatness and the wonder of the wealth that the Lord blessed Solomon with. I often have wondered in the past why this story about the Queen of Sheba is here in this way. They could have easily just said the Queen of Sheba came and showed honor to Solomon, but they don't just say that. They go into details here about what she said, how she had these exchanges with Solomon, and contrary to some recent statements, I don't believe that there was any kind of a sexual relationship between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This was strictly on the up and ups. She came with an expectation of being disappointed in the things that she'd heard in her own country about Solomon, because they were outrageous. The things that were said to her were beyond belief, that she couldn't believe that anyone would be able to build in such a short period of time a great kingdom after the form that Solomon had created. So when she came, she had this expectation, I believe, in her heart of being disappointed. But she was shocked. And in verse 5, when it says there was no more breath in her, that means she was it was a breathtaking situation. She was breathtaking. That's our phrase for that. It was too much for her to believe, and when she saw it, she couldn't fathom that what she had seen was more than what she'd been told. So let's look at this in a little more detail. She came to test him with hard questions. It says in verse 1, she came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue. That means an entourage beyond imagination. Great numbers of people and great wealth she brought with her to show honor to Solomon, if she did in fact find what she'd been told she would find. With camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. So she didn't hold back. When she came into the presence of Solomon, she told him what she was there to find. And I also believe she had a great many questions about the world and about nature, about things she had observed and situations she had encountered as queen. I am sure she had a great many questions. And Solomon answered all her questions in verse 3. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. Now, he did not explain things like I explain things. Some people come to me with crazy questions and I give them crazy answers that can't possibly be true. And I have to tell them before I'm done that I'm not telling them something they need to hear, because I apparently have the ability to convince people that what I've said to them is true when it's not in fact true. So I have to be careful about the way that I sarcastically respond to people. But Solomon didn't do that. Solomon said things that were true. He was able to explain the things that were on her heart, the things that she wanted to know the why about. And that's an amazing thing to me. In verse 4, when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers, and his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more breath in her. She was breathtaking. That's an amazing thing. She had been queen. She had experienced what it meant to be queen. She was not a poor person. What she brought to Solomon proves that. And she had lived in wealth and power a significant portion of her life, I would assume. And she comes here with the knowledge of what is great and what should be the standing of a great king. And she was breathtaking by what she saw. So in verse 6, she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came, and my own eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told to me. So not only did she find what had been told to her, which she could not fathom to be true when she left, Sheba, she came here and she found the things that they had described were not even half the measure of what she found. These things surpassed anything that she believed she would find at best. She continues, your wisdom and prosperity surpass the report that I heard. Happy are your men. And I think in 2 Chronicles it says, happy are your wives. Happy are your men, happy are your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. What a great statement, brought from someone who simply witnessed the greatness of Solomon in his kingdom. She recognized the greatness of the Lord who had set him in power because of the greatness that he had displayed before her. These things are kind of odd to us because we don't in this country, I don't believe that we have this mindset. It's still found in the world today, but not in the way that we live as Americans necessarily. There are certainly those in our population who do still measure people by their material wealth, but the standing here of Solomon was more than just material wealth. She was astounded not only by the material things that she saw, but by his wisdom, and she could tell that the Lord delighted in him by the fact that he had been set on the throne and was executing justice and righteousness in the way that he did. That is a great, great thing to have said about you. And I think if more of our leaders today would seek this kind of praise from one another, the world would be a better place. Wouldn't it be great if what our leaders delighted in was not so much power and lording over resources as it was knowing that they were executing justice and righteousness among the people that they led? What a great, great thing that would be. In verse 10, she gave the king 120 talents of gold and a very great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again came such an abundance of spices as these that the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So that this was her sharing her wealth and her means to bring honor to Solomon. Then it goes on and tells this additional story of the fleet of Hiram that had been going back and forth to Ophir, which brought also not only the gold that was described in the previous chapter, but also this wood that's described here as almug wood. I don't know what that is, but it says that there was not any more ever brought, but this that was brought they took and made supports for the Lord's house and for the king's house as well, and made instruments for the singers to use as well. And this must have been a very hard wood in order to be able to handle the kinds of strains it would take, not only as supports in these houses, because they were largely already constructed, but to support the lyres and harps, to have the wiring on them that make them work properly and still provide a resonant sound is a sign of a very strong wood too. Continuing, King Solomon gave to the queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatever she asked beside what was given her by the bounty of King Solomon. So not only did she give King Solomon something, King Solomon gave her of his wealth, and then after he had given her that present, if she asked for anything else, he gave that as well. And then she turned and went back to her own land with her servants. So what did all this mean? This is a confirmation in my mind of everything we've read in the other chapters of the greatness of what Solomon had created. We had only the word of the writers that Solomon did these great wonders, but now there's a confirmation that this queen came from a foreign land, a wealthy queen, a queen capable of recognizing great wealth and power and honor and respect from the people that he ruled. And she saw that these things were true, that she'd heard, and she, in the telling of this back to Solomon, is telling us as well that the things we've read about are not anywhere close to the greatness of what Solomon's kingdom was. It was a tremendously wealthy kingdom. And then it goes on with more description, and we'll get into that in a moment. But why is this here? Why are we seeing this recounting of this greatness of Solomon, the great wealth that was visited upon Solomon? We go on to verse 14. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Now I don't know. We know the number 666 has a meaning in another area. And I don't know if this is not tied to it. So just keep that in mind. I don't know that I'll get into that any further, but as I talk about why I think this chapter is here, why we're reading about the greatness of King Solomon's kingdom, the implications of that, the significance of that 666 may be tied to the significance of that number in other places. Besides that which came from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. And then it talks about these shields that Solomon made. There were 200 large shields and 300 shields of other shields of gold that were also made. And these were the ones that were put in the house of the forest of Lebanon. And he made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. And this must have been a wondrous thing to witness as well. And I wonder if this was there when the queen came, if she saw this, or if this is something that happened later in the rule of Solomon. This throne sat on top of a set of stairs, 6 stairs, and on each stair a lion was on each end of it. And then at the top of it, it says a round top here in this English Standard Version translation, but in the footnote it says possibly the translation is a calf's head, so that might have had some kind of a representation of a calf at the top of that throne, which may be significant in what we see later in the Acts of Jeroboam. I don't know. This presence of the calf in the regality of the materials involved with the kingdom is interesting to me. And the difference between that and an idol is also something that I wonder about. Having said that, going on, all the King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels in the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. None were silver. Silver was not considered anything in the days of Solomon. There was such great wealth that silver was not even considered a precious metal in the land of Solomon. And it describes these ships of Tarshish or Tarshish that sailed along with the fleet of Hiram, and they would come every 3 years and bring gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks, and or baboons. The word peacocks is footnoted as possibly being baboons instead of peacocks. I don't know the significance of having apes and baboons or peacocks either, how that was a representation of wealth in the kingdom, but the other things are certainly associated with wealth. Gold, silver, and ivory are things that are valued even to this day. Peacock feathers were also very valuable and are still. King Solomon, it says in verse 23, excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God put into his mind. Every one of them brought presents, articles of silver and gold, garments, myrrh, spices, horses and mules, so much year by year. So every year, more and more kings and people of power came to see Solomon, to witness not only his wealth and his kingdom, but to experience his presence and hear his wisdom. And that's a tremendous thing as well. Sadly, we'll find out in chapter 11 that it didn't always work out always to the best interest of Solomon. In verse 26, Solomon gathered together chariots. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities. So again, I believe the chariot cities were the foundation of the economic system for Israel, as he had to furnish the materials for the chariot cities to be there. They had to provide materials for the chariot cities to live off of. They had to bring men in and out. They had to bring horses in and out. They had to maintain the chariots. So these were on the roads of Israel, and they would have effectively provided patrols. And patrols mean that commerce can be conducted rather securely without being under threat of or peril of being robbed or destroyed by pirates or thieves or those who just want to destroy things. That's a very good way to secure the wealth of your land as a leader. Make sure there's a good transportation system, a good way to secure commerce, and that is one of the benefits of our country, is our ability to move around and conduct commerce securely and safely on our transportation system. You're welcome for that engineering insight. Now the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. Scott has had in his lesson this past week, I think, information about the Shephelah, how it was in disposition toward the rest of Israel. Jerusalem was along the mountain line next to the Dead Sea, the Jordan, and then the Shephelah was between that area and the Mediterranean coast. And there were great forests there, and that's, I believe, what they're talking about. Sycamores were probably not as desirable a kind of wood as the cedars of Lebanon. So that's an amazing thing that this cedar from Lebanon was so plentiful in Jerusalem, not being a native wood to that area. Solomon imported horses from Egypt in this place called Kue, and the traders received them from Kue at a price. Basically, they were trading out these chariots. They bought chariots not only for their own use, but they bought them to trade to the other kingdoms in the area. So they became a hub for this trade center for these chariots. They had the wealth to buy chariots, and then they could channel those chariots to other people and sold them at significant profit to the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. Now, the rationale there, I don't necessarily understand. Those kings would become thorns in the side of Israel later, and Egypt would as well. So it's an interesting thing. The circumstance that Solomon finds himself in, certainly blessed by the Lord. It was self-evident through only the most cursory observation. You could see that the Lord blessed Solomon, that the Lord blessed Israel because of Solomon. And it's an amazing thing to hear about this great wealth. And it is a terrible tragedy what happens in the next chapter. I've been loath to cover these stories because these stories are some of the saddest things that I think are in Scripture. That the Lord would bless a people so much, certainly an individual like Solomon, but the people of Israel so much, and then we find that they turn from the Lord in chapter 11. I don't think I'm giving much away there, but I hope you found a word of encouragement in today's study. I certainly do find this an amazing thing. This story about the Queen of Sheba is an amazing thing, a confirmation that the word that is recorded here is if anything, lacking in the description of how great Solomon's kingdom was. We will be meeting today at 10 a.m., so please join us if you can. Hope to see you there. If you're sick in any way, please don't come to the auditorium, but instead stay home and enjoy the streaming service. God bless. Have a great week.